Hi, I'm Erica, and I'm a quilter. I have been quilting for about 18 years now, but I want to give you a little bit of background on myself so that you can understand how I ended up as a quilter. You see, when I was in high school, I used to sew a couple of pieces for myself here and there, but they were always garments. And garment sewing just was not my thing. Truthfully, that's my mom's thing, not mine. But I still had this desire, this need to create. So as I got older and moving through the years, I did some hand embroidery. I tried all sorts of different kinds of sewing, and nothing really took until a friend of mine had her baby. And I made my first quilt, and it was glorious. It was the best experience ever. The thing that I think I like best about quilting is that I don't have to follow instructions if I don't want to. I am able to look at a pattern, look at a quilt, and break it down and make it in the way that I feel most comfortable making it. As quilters, as you journey through the world of quilting, you're going to find that that is going to be true for you also. There are a lot of people out there who enjoy English paper piecing. There are people who will enjoy foundation paper piecing. There are people who enjoy just the traditional blocks. There are all sorts of ways to create in the quilting world. I encourage everybody to find that mode of quilting that suits them best. That's how I ended up as a quilter. We joke about the fact that I don't like to follow instructions, and I pretty much don't. But quilting allows me to create either using instructions or visually looking at a quilt that someone else has made and coming up with a way for myself to recreate that quilt. Through the videos that I'm going to show you here on my Patreon channel, you're going to have an opportunity to see how I quilt, see the patterns that I use, the fabrics, and just be able to work through the quilting process with me. And hopefully you'll be able to apply all of those things that I do to your own quilting so that you can maybe take a little bit of what I've done and take a little bit of what another teacher has done and really create the quilting that suits your personality. For as much as there are different ways of making a quilt, every quilter knows that there are certain things that are consistent. So as you watch my videos, hopefully you will choose to subscribe and see my process, but as you watch my videos, you're going to see that there are certain things that I always do. My cutting is always consistent. My seam allowances are always consistent. My pressing is always consistent. Those three things, if you go wonky on any of that, you're going to be lost. You're not going to have a very good outcome. So I'm hoping that you will find in my videos some guidance in that direction. I'm going to give you tips and guidance. I'm going to show you tools that help me, rulers that I think are so cool, and just different things to hopefully broaden your understanding of quilting and broaden your desire to create for yourself. I hope that you will go on this journey with me and have fun, be inspired, and create. In this video today, I want to show you the cutting. I want to show you the seam allowance, and I want to show you the pressing so that you can have your foundation in place so that once we start actually getting in there with the fabric and the needles and the da-da-da-da-da, once we start creating, then you're going to say, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do this easily. That is my hope. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys about today is seam allowance. One of the three important things that you need to keep in mind when you are quilting is your seam allowance. In order to get a block that looks nice and neat with your points that match, just like those, you're going to have to make sure that your seam allowance is consistent. Every quilt pattern works under the assumption that you're going to use a consistent 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. We don't want more than a 1/4 of an inch. We don't want less than a 1/4 of an inch because your points are not going to fall in the right place if they are not on that 1/4 of an inch. Now, in the quilting world, you're going to hear people talk about a scant quarter. What that means is if you draw a line on your fabric and you know that from the edge, the cut edge of your fabric to that line is a 1/4 of an inch, then a scant 1/4 of an inch is going to be just a hair on the inside of that line to make that 1/4 inch just a little bit short. Doing something like that is not a bad way to go. But I encourage everybody to make sure that you use, if you're going to use a scant 1/4, then you consistently use a scant 1/4 of an inch. If you're going to use a standard 1/4, I encourage you always use a standard 1/4, because if you start to mix the two, then you're going to have trouble with your seams and getting your points to match up exactly as they should. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to go about getting that standard 1/4 of an inch all the way through your quilt. There are different ways to go about doing it. We can use tape, we can use a 1/4 of an inch a 1/4 inch presser foot. You can use markings on your standard presser foot. Lots of different things that you can do. I'm going to just show you a couple of them today. Now, there are 3 different ways that you can go about finding your seam allowance. First way is with your presser foot. You can make a mark, like I've made a mark here on my standard presser foot to show that this is a 1/4 of an inch. The distance from the needle to the outside of my presser foot is more than a 1/4 of an inch. So I found where a 1/4 of an inch is and marked it. To do that, notice that my tape measure is upside down, right? And I'm going to line up the middle of my presser foot, wherever my needle defaults. I'm going to line that up with an inch line on my tape measure. I will lower my presser, because that I know is where my needle is going to come down. And here it comes, right on this line. So then I can see, here's my 1/4 of an inch, and I can mark on my presser foot where that 1/4 inch lies. Another thing that I can do, if I don't want to mark on my presser foot, is move this 1/4 inch mark over to the edge of my presser foot. Now, my needle is in the wrong place. What am I going to do? Well, if you watch the needle, I'm going to move it over until it comes to lie right on top of the inch line, which is right here. Let me check and see if it worked. I can go over a little bit more, I think. There we go. Now we have where my needle is positioned is a 1/4 of an inch from the edge of my presser foot. Okay, everybody's machine should be able to adjust in this way. If your machine does not allow you to adjust in such small increments, then I would suggest just using your presser foot and making the mark on it there. Another thing that we can do, if you have the means, is to use what is called a 1/4 inch foot. The distance from the center of the foot to the edge of the foot right here is a 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so as I run my fabric through, if my needle is in the center position, as I run my fabric through, I can line it up with this gap right here, and I know that I have a consistent 1/4 of an inch. Now, something to keep in mind, if you choose to follow the direct edge of the foot or you choose to follow the blade, doesn't really matter, just make sure you are consistent. Another thing that you can do if you don't want to, or if you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, is to mark directly on your machine. So again, what I'm doing is I place my tape measure with the increment marks closest to me. I place that right under my needle, And then I can use a piece of painter's tape. Painter's tape is really nice because it allows for you to place a mark on your machine and remove it pretty easily. So on my tape, this is 1/8 of an inch, here's my quarter, there's my half. 1/4 of an inch, and I have to make sure that it's straight, right? So place that there, and then I can remove my measuring tape. Now, something I want you to keep in mind when you're using the painter's tape, make sure that you do not cover up your feed dogs with the painter's tape. The tape needs to fall short of where your feed dogs are, because if you get tape on top of your feed dogs, that's going to get in the way of the functioning of your machine. Make sure you don't do that. But it's easy to remove. Say you switch from making quilts and you're now wanting to make, garments. You can always take it off. There's nothing left, no residue, nothing left. You can again measure and replace your tape wherever you want it and continue on. So our options are to measure and place down tape, measure and mark on the presser foot, or just change your presser foot altogether to a 1/4 inch foot, like that. The next thing I want to talk to you guys about today is cutting. Back in the day, when quilters would start a project, they'd have templates, they'd draw their template design, their pieces on the fabric, and then use scissors to cut around those shapes. Well, the problem with that is that drawing templates and cutting with scissors makes for very inaccurate shapes. So what has developed over the years is the cutting system where you use a rotary blade, ruler, and a cutting mat all together in conjunction to create these nice straight lines. The good thing about using these 3 tools together is that you're able to make several cuts at one time, and they all match the same way. The same size, the same angles, everything. It's really a wonderful thing that we have. Now you do need to make sure that you understand when you're using your rotary blade that you use it with a self-healing mat, not a mat that you're going to feel the grooves and ridges that are created, something that's going to self-heal. And self-healing mats they're labeled as such, but they're going to help your blade to last longer, your mat will last longer, your cuts are going to be more accurate because the markings are not going to change. I highly recommend self-healing mats. Please make sure that you're not using your rotary cutter directly on the table. Always have your mat. The rulers that are available for you to use with your rotary cutter are about 1/8 of an inch thick. You can't use just a standard ruler that you got from your office supply store. You have to get a cutting ruler. And what's nice about these is that the lines on your cutting ruler are going to match up with the lines on your mat. And so you can use those two together to make sure that you are lining up your fabric straight and you're making your cuts nice and straight and square. Very important. And there are lots of different rulers that you can use, lots of different options out there. You have the long straight ones, you have 1/4 inch ones. One of the other rulers, I suggest that any quilter has a long, wide ruler. This one measures 5 inches, but I also recommend that every quilter have at least one size of a square ruler. This is going to help you when it comes to actually squaring up your blocks, because you want all your blocks to be the same size, so that when you sew them together, you have your points matching and it doesn't look all wonky. Very important detail. So make sure that if you're just starting your journey into quilting, you have a square ruler of some size. I have 3, 4, 5 of them, I think. So make sure you have a square ruler and make sure you have a nice long one that you can cut your big pieces of fabric with. So here we're going to do a little bit of cutting. I'm going to show you how easy it is to cut and trim up a piece of fabric. The fabric that I have here is not a very large piece, but we do have some fraying going on that can trim off. We also have the selvage that we want to take off. Anytime you're doing your sewing, you want to make sure you take your selvage off, because that part if you guys can see, there are holes that are made when the fabric is woven, and those will not come out even after they wash. So you want to take your selvage off every time you sew. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to try and take off the selvage off of this piece of fabric. So to do that, I want to make sure that my selvage is hanging off over an inch line. Here's where the inch line starts, and here it is again down here. So I'm going to make sure that my selvage is beyond that inch line. I don't know if these cuts are straight or not, and I'm not going to worry about it right now. What I just want to do is show you the function, the way the ruler and the mat function together. Now, placing my ruler on top of my fabric, I'm always going to cut on the right-hand side of my ruler because I am right-handed. If you are left-handed, you'll cut on the left-hand side. I'm going to line up the edge of my ruler with the inch line that I'm hoping to follow. But I'm not just lining it up because that can have some problems too. I want to look at the black lines that are on the ruler and make sure that they are covering, right here you see they're no longer covering the yellow line of the mat. So I'm going to adjust just a little bit, slide it over, and make sure that all the way down I'm following the black line on top of the yellow. That's how I'm going to know that my cut is going to be straight. Now to make my cut, my ruler is here. I'm going to put downward pressure on top of the ruler. I do not want to have pressure going this way or to the side, any at all, because as I cut, I don't want to slip and have the ruler move. So I'm going to give downward pressure straight down. Make sure that my thumb is away from the edge. I don't want my thumb that way. Bring the thumb in. Release the blade and cut slowly. Now, and when I'm finished, close it up. Now, there is a tendency sometimes to cut and veer off to the side. If you tip your blade just a little bit toward your ruler, then you're going to ensure that your cut is straight against your ruler. So I've made my cut and I can move my fabric and there it is. Nice clean cut, straight every time, okay? So if you remember those things every time, downward pressure on the ruler, make sure the ruler is covering the lines that you need, downward pressure, open the blade, cut, close the blade. As soon as you get to the end, close your blade before you put it down. And then you can check to see if your fabric has cut correctly. Correct posture, usage of your three elements here are going to help to ensure that you have good, accurate cutting every time. So the last part of the requirements that you need to make sure you keep track of while quilting is your ironing. Now, there's a difference between ironing and pressing. Ironing is when you are looking at a large piece of fabric, your yardage that you've just purchased, and you move your iron on top of it, just like that. You use your hot implement to move on top of your fabric. The other thing, which is pressing, is what you do when you have blocks with seams. Now here, we don't want to use the hot iron and push because all of these seams can stretch and distort the block. What you want to do is use your iron carefully to apply pressure and raise it. Apply pressure and raise. Opening up seams, just like that one, you apply pressure and raise it. There are different things that you can use when you're pressing or when you're ironing, either one. What I like to use is this wool pressing mat. It's almost a ½ inch thick, and it helps to get these seams nice and flat. This is a well-pressed block to start off with, but it helps to get your seams nice and flat. Another tool that you can use is a liquid pressing agent. Mary Ellen's Best Press is one of them. There's one that's called Soak. There's one that's called Flatter. Lots of different sizing pressing liquids that you can use. You can also just get a little bottle of water and squirt your water on top and use the iron to allow for that steam to make your seams flat. Whatever you use, make sure that you keep those two techniques separate. You press with your blocks with lots of seams because you don't want to distort and open up seams. And then with yardage, large pieces of fabric, you can iron. Keep those two separate and you'll do great. So I hope that everything I talked about today was informative, not just about me, but about the basics that you need to do your craft. I'm going to be showing you through my Patreon videos, I'm going to be showing you exactly how to keep these things consistent. The seam allowance and the cutting and the pressing, how to make sure that you keep those things consistent so that you will be able to produce the best outcome blocks that you can. I have several levels of membership for my Patreon channel, so you can choose the one that's going to work best for you. The higher memberships are going to obviously come with, you know, some really sweet perks, coupons that you'll be able to take advantage of. But the thing that I want you guys always to take away is inspiration and the feeling that yes, you can do this too. All you have to do is find the right teacher. You need to find the right technique that works best for you. And I'm going to introduce quite a few techniques. We're going to work with curves. We're going to work with lots of small pieces. We're going to work with finding your points and all sorts of different things to make sure that your quilting comes out really, really well. So I hope you'll subscribe and stick with me for a while so that you can learn quite a bit. I'll see you on the other side. Bye.